I feel like it's always good to get my meetings going on time, otherwise we'll go later. And I know I totally agree that we shouldn't, so we'll try and keep ourselves in good order. Welcome to the meeting. I'd like to stand and say the karakia, and I'd like to invite you to join me if you'd like to as well. You're most welcome to do that. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia kina ki uta, kia tara ki tai, he ake ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hohu, te he moriora. Thank you. Actually, it's the second time I've been in a meeting in the last 24 hours where that karakia is being used, and I always think about the promise of a glorious day. Let's claim that for the afternoon, and we'll be the better off for it, won't we? So again, welcome everybody here. Rebecca and Tori, thank you for coming to our little gathering. It's great to have you here, and I'm deeply appreciative. I've heard you've run a great quick meeting, Rebecca, this morning. So I've been told that actually I should have come to observe how to do it. So that's wonderful. But it's tremendous to have you folk here. Sarah, welcome. Do we have apologies? People are able to stay here for the course of the meeting. We are scheduled to go through to 4:30. I'll try and keep reasonably much to time, but as always, staff have given us a very good agenda, which is full. Folk able to say that's great. I've got no apology. Oh, sorry, John. Tim's going to come in at 2:30. That's great. Well, perhaps we could just recognise an apology for lateness, which is fine. So, look, I'll move that from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, John. I'll put it all those in favour. Please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. Are there any matters coming up in the course of the meeting for which your interests may or may not interfere with your ability to be involved? They're not. That's great. Actually, it's interesting. I have met with you guys, and I thought this was my second meeting for the year, or for the Tronium, but we've had no other meetings and there are no minutes, so that's great. I haven't been informed of any items not on the agenda, and I haven't been informed of any member of the public wishing to talk to us. They're at a risk committee. The public should be talking to us, but anyway, never mind. We're open now for general business, so if I could invite probably Richard, you're coming forward, please, and we'll look at the assurance and integrity update. Thanks, man.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Bruce. I'll take the paper as read. I'll just point some highlights in there. 4 key things to point out. Our audit work plan for the year is on track. We've been reasonably well resourced throughout the year, and we're delivering the audits as planned. It's been good, solid progress on historic audit recommendations. There's a section in the report which shows that we've managed to close out some very long-standing recommendations. The completeness of the elected member gifts and hospitality declarations is still a work in progress, I think. And there is.
You haven't resorted to naming them yet, have you?
And for the eagle-eyed, I updated the table but didn't update paragraph 4, so there's a little bit of inconsistency there. The table is correct. And also, one of the investigations that we reported last year, we're considering options for proceeding through civil debt recovery for that one. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate for the brief report. It's a very fulsome report, and it's good for us to see these. This is the assurance side of our risk business, so it's great to understand where we're at. Do we have questions for Richard or staff that are here? Yes, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Can you just give me an example of, there's a category of valuation of investment properties. Can you give an example of what sort of properties would be considered investment properties? Oh, it's one of the items.
Sure, if that's this paper. Forgive me.
If it's not.
We're in the integrity update, Sarah.
Okay, might be the next paper. Sorry if it is.
That might be, you're thinking of the audit plan where we've got an item there. Yes, okay, well, I'll hold your question, good question, but we'll deal with that when we get to the audit plan. Although, Richard, I thought you could have given me a response, but never mind. Iona, did you have a question?
Yeah, so just I know it's a work in progress, but around the recruitment and vetting requirements for people working with children. So I guess I'm just concerned, you talk about criminal vetting and all the rest of it, but it's really, isn't that just if the police manage to catch people? Are you satisfied that our checks are going to be rigorous enough to make sure that people are very good in terms of dealing with children?
Going to push that one across to Meredith, if that's okay. Thank you.
Through you, Chair. Yes, we are satisfied that we're meeting the requirements through both MOJ checks and police checks when required under the Vulnerable Children's Act. We did have a lag that we have now caught up on, and there are no issues or concerns.
And I presume we can exceed the requirements?
We can only go based on the information that's provided to us by the police and MOJ. There is no other way to check that.
I just mean in terms of, even if people haven't been convicted of anything, in terms of referee checks, that a behaviour is very appropriate.
Well, we do as much due diligence as we possibly can, but of course, if they don't provide referees that are going to give us that information, then over and above what we do, it would be very hard to find out if there is a past that hasn't been declared or they have to be charged for.
Okay, yeah, that is a difficult one. And just actually, this will be a question for you too, Meredith. The holiday pay issue, is that likely to mean lots of people having to pay money back?
No, there's already been a decision that we will not be recouping any overpayments, but the large majority will be underpayments, so it's us owing them, as every other organisation has also discovered as they've gone through the holiday remediation projects.
Right, okay, so, and that is likely to be a significant amount?
We haven't done the actual remediation at this point. We've had difficulties with the system and the getting changes made to the system by the provider, but we're getting closer to phase 1 being completed and remediation will commence shortly. We don't know how large it will be, but it's not as large, we believe, as we had first feared.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that, Ona. Do you have the questions for Richard? Richard, I just had probably one or two in my head. I was looking at the management practices for the retaining walls, which I think was one of the responsive reviews that you did, and it seemed to focus around the terrace slip. If I understand the geography of Wellington correctly, we've got a good number of retaining walls, probably numbering in the hundreds. Was this a particular review into the events of the terrace slip, or is this more meant to be a targeted review across all our management of retaining walls?
Thank you, Chair. It was triggered by the slips on the terrace, but it looked across the management practices for all retaining walls and came up with recommendations to improve the whole process.
Yes, brilliant. And look, can you just interpret code for me, please? And it doesn't matter which, it happens in a couple of places, but in terms of the progress on the Assurance of Integrity Business Work Plan, we come up with a couple of assessments where improvements are required and the controls are not effective. Now, that's a reasonably a concrete finding, which is, I appreciate the work that you guys do and your team. Can I ask, what has been the response from the managers out of those areas? I'd expect it to be pretty effective and fast.
Yes, I'm just thinking the retaining walls.
Oh, sorry. I've moved past the retaining walls.
Okay.
If you go over to page 15 of the agenda as it's published and diligent, I'm looking at things like recruitment, employment documents, or at the bottom of the page and over the page is building controls follow-up review, where we have assessed this as not effective, and that's a fairly direct assessment. Thank you.
In both those cases, employment documents and the building accreditation reviews, the findings were well received. I think some of the actions were already implemented before we'd completed the audit, so it shows we're working alongside.
Good.
And we're able to use the full range of our recommendations. So it's a good sign.
Good. Oh, thank you for that. Appreciate that. And I'm glad it's important that your arm of the organisation is well respected and their views accepted. inside the organisation if we're going to get improvement. That's great, thank you. Any other questions that I've raised, that you might have raised with Richard? There aren't. Can we move to the recommendations, please, which are that we receive the report. We note the 2 additional responsive reports that you've finished us with. Thank you, Richard. We received the update on progress, the information on the integrity activities, and the statement on completeness of the gifts and hospitality register. Perhaps I should put the members' gifts and hospitality register, given you had a little message there about getting it complete. Do I have a mover and seconder, please? Thank you, Tony. Thank you, John. Appreciate that. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? Oh. Please take a vote. That's right. I'm used to the old voice here. You did this last time, Emily, I seem to recall with me. Apologies. I have ordered. I've done that. Okay, thank you. So the motion's carried. Thank you very much. Can we move on to item, I'll get myself right here, 2.2, which is the audit plan. And who's going to speak to me on that one? Karen, I think I'd like to invite you, and Stephen, are you going to speak to it as well? Or straight into Karen?
Karen and Rainer.
Rainer, thank you, Rainer. Thank you, Karen.
Kia ora. So I will take the report as read. We are working with Audit New Zealand through the audit plan to confirm dates for the audit of the annual report this year. We have met with them and we're just finalising those currently. Yeah.
That's a critical statement, Karen, because actually you and I know it's a normal year. So, we were challenged with a non-normal year, and so to suddenly bring it back to being normal, that may be something you just want to give us an update on as you reflect more broadly on your plan, which I'd invite you to talk to us about.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. It is indeed a normal year, supposedly anyway, so I'll put some context around that. So for us, the normal year means back to statutory deadlines in the Local Government Act, so no amendments to extend deadlines, as has been the case the last 3 years. That said, just to paint some context, so it's a normal year, normal deadline, but we're in a bit of a transition year because we've got some arrears audits which we are chomping through as quickly as possible. What that means for the council audit, this council audit and many other council audits, is that while we would very much like to, we won't be starting the interim audits until May, June timing. But we have proposed a plan which we've discussed with council, and they've come back to us with a few tweaks, which works our way to signing within the statutory deadline, a week shy of the statutory deadline actually, just before Labour Day, so everyone can go away on that Friday, not have to worry about coming back to adopt an annual report and us signing an annual report. So after this year, you know, no more transitions, no more abnormalities, hopefully, and get back for real to the timetable which, if the council wishes, we had with the council pre-COVID, which was doing interim phased throughout the calendar year, and signing by the end of October. So it's not going to be so squished. Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Given the nature of the resolutions, there's also a fee letter somewhere in the system, which we haven't seen, but is sitting there in some way looking to be negotiated, correct?
What we have in front of you is the audit plan, which is our plan for the annual audit for the year, and the engagement letter is because there's a new council.
Yep.
What has to be provided because we're doing a central template to include some of the common sector issues across all councils is the audit proposal letter, and typically that letter covers 3 years in terms of time, costs, resources, and has got 3 years of fees. I actually am unable to tell you whether it will be 3 years of fees this time round because of the Three Waters legislation and some uncertainty about where that will land.
And so we don't have that proposal at this moment. That's
No.
coming, Karen. Okay, brilliant.
That's coming, Bruce.
Yep, no, that's fine.
Yes.
Appreciate that. Okay, thank you for that background. So there are two letters that we're dealing with here. Obviously, the critical one is they're both critical, but the critical one in the sense of the audit is actually the audit plan. Do we have questions for Karen? Yes, go for it, Tony. No.
Thank you. It's really just a general question, given the resource pressure is still ongoing. I mean, from a council perspective, they have confidence in the dates. Or just can you comment just on the confidence of the dates that have been outlined in terms of the schedule? I know that meets them, but it's also a wee bit tight. So I just wonder if you could just comment a bit further about the date side of the deadlines and your confidence in the audit process being able to achieve them.
Of me. Oh, sorry. So, Councillor Randall, the dates we've proposed are what is, I guess, being a little bit selfish, achievable for us. And we've been quite open and transparent about that. While we would like to do it earlier, get it underway, currently that's not practical because we are prioritising the councils, especially that have yet to be completely audited and signed in terms of the 2021-2022 financial year.
Thank you, Karen, as always. I guess I'm just wanting to know whether there'll be particular emphasis given around our assets, because we had lights falling off and we didn't know about it. I think there was some understanding of the officers. Obviously, we've had problems with water. Will there be a really critical, or is there able to be a critical approach to make sure that we're not missing any other problems?
In regards to the lights falling off, so far I only know what I've read in the newspaper. We will most certainly have some meetings with council and management to understand whether or not, I guess, they are isolated assets, and how you're keeping up to date your asset management plans and how you know about the condition of your assets. So we will make some general inquiries as part of the audit.
I mean, would you say, though, that the audit process, it's not pushing any blame, but that it wasn't able to unearth some previous issues?
In fairness to Karen, can I say I wouldn't expect that?
Yes.
Let's just remember Karen's role is to put an opinion on the annual report, and the lens and the focus through which the auditor looks at their work is, sorry, I'm telling you your work, I know, Karen, is the annual report. I think, Karen, if I can tell you, your business would be very interested in this from an impairment perspective and how we report those assets. I think the deeper issue of is this a systemic issue, etc., is for a different part of the meeting and a discussion elsewhere. Sarah, you had a question on investment of properties, I think.
I did. Sorry, I rusted it on the wrong paper. The valuation of investment properties, I'm just wondering what you consider to be can you give us an example of what's considered to be an investment property?
Oh, so there are properties that the council holds to derive income from, primarily.
For example, our ground leases.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So I was thinking, would our facilities like, the Takina Convention Centre or the Michael Fowler Centre be examples or not really?
So they're not investment properties as such. They are property plant, defined as property plant equipment.
Okay. And I also wondered, because I don't understand it very well, if you could just elaborate a little bit what the valuation of weather tightness liabilities involves.
Weather tightness liabilities requires an actual real valuation to be completed to estimate what those liabilities are and to value them.
Can you just outline a little bit more about the procedure, because it is a fairly big amount of money? So yeah.
Yes, it was originally a bigger balance than it is now because the number of weather tightness claims have been settled over the years, and so that actuarial valuation just puts a current value on those claims. So it's a declining balance.
So it's about the claims that have been lodged. I understand that. Thank you.
The claims that have been lodged and an assessment of the liabilities in relation to those claims that council is up for.
So that would make an actuarial assessment, Sarah, of what could be future claims as well. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Mainly because we've got a past action that could give rise to a liability. So it's an actuarial assessment as well. Thank you for that. Any other questions for Karen? Yes, John.
Thanks, Bruce. Karen, so this is a 3-year engagement. So does that mean we've just finished a 3-year engagement?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And so in terms of audit continuity, how long have you been the engagement auditor?
So this is my 6th year.
Okay, and what's the view of the Audit Office on tenure for auditors?
So there, for key audit personnel, so includes the audit director, myself, the audit manager, and our quality assurance or peer review director is 6 years. What has happened though, and I'm not sure that will be the case here, but the auditor is usually appointed for 1 more year to see through the long-term plan in some cases.
Okay, so we're likely to see a different auditor next year?
Well, that's the bit that I'm uncertain about.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
But in normal circumstances with normal entities, that could be the case. There are exceptions to the rule, though.
Okay.
Thanks, Karen. So yes, I appreciate the 6-year mark means normally rotation off of senior personnel, John. So again, that would be useful to know quite what is the transition plan, Karen, because it would be great if we could, with presence with you, obviously, also meet the new audit director and ensure we've got a smooth handover, as you can tell us how that's to be determined. I hear the point about your value to us and still being here for the LTP. Right, are there any other questions for Karen at this stage? Can I just ask a couple if I can at the moment? Look, I appreciate the core stuff around the big issues. They make a lot of sense to me and they're the logical ones that we would be on, Karen. Can I just check about the group audit? Because we are obviously responsible for the group, so I'm looking at page 40 of our agenda. And you indicate that naturally Wellington International Airport and Wellington Water, they are the two material subsidiaries that you must receive clearance on before we can give a group opinion. The rest are treated as, in audit's term, I'm going to say audit slang, I should be careful with my terminology here, in audit terminology as being not material. We don't have to see those audits through before you can give an opinion on the group accounts, correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's correct.
Right. Do we have any sense? I don't want to hold the meeting up, but do we have any sense about whether any of those other entities have been signed off? All their audits are up to date.
Sorry,
Perhaps that's
Chair.
something you could advise us of after the meeting. I don't, by separate email. I don't really want to do it, but I'm just conscious that we are responsible for a group position, and I don't want us to get too far away from those audits also being complete. I don't know they'd come back and bite us in terms of our accountability, but it's just good matter to have those cleaned up. So I would appreciate if we just get some advice. It doesn't have to be today, but some advice, please, as to where they are at, because I'd be very keen that, again, we're in a normal year. We want to get these ones cleaned up.
Certainly. Thank you.
So look, that's fine. And in fact, Ona, perhaps I was interested in your question because I was going to ask, and Karen does say that at the bottom of her section issue is any other additional matters, and perhaps you've hinted at actually you'd like a careful look at impairment and assets that may be at risk. So we can take that one on board. Are there any other thoughts from members about issues? Because Karen asks that at the bottom of page 38, please tell us about any additional matters that we should consider. I always think it's important to ask that question of you as elected members, bearing in mind my rant before that Karen's view is on the annual report rather than actually directly our operations. Yes, Ona.
I always say something. There you go. Climate change. Always. I know we've got a longer term plan, but every year, just given that nature is on the move.
Are you able to be more specific about what you'd be expecting the audit to do?
Yeah, so I guess we're starting our adaptation planning, so I guess I just look, maybe would it be appropriate to ask about progress on Te Atakura?
In what sense? I mean, again, I want to come back to the fact we're asking Karen if
Are we
we're going to
doing
ask...
what we said we'd do?
Pardon?
Are we doing what we said we'd do? Hold us to account.
Well, I don't think we need to... Look, let's take that one on advice. That's useful to raise, and perhaps, Karen, I could ask you to check with management just on where that should go. Tony?
And just, sorry, the other thing, which I'll talk about later too, is our earthquake risk that I am continue to be concerned about the council's approach just to looking at our own assets, not the city assets. So in terms of, is it appropriate, just asking, are we able to ask the auditors to see whether we are fulfilling all our roles, not just as a regulator, but as advocate and policymaker and so on?
Well, I'll let Karen answer that, but I think it might be a stretch. I mean, I think if you're talking about our own assets and earthquake proofness, yes, that's a valuation and a representation issue. But if you're asking her to undertake performance audits, which is what I hear in a couple of your comments, that's not directly Karen's role. And she wouldn't, and I'm arguing for your case, she wouldn't do that as part of the audit. That would be a separate exercise.
That's
You'd
right.
pay somebody to do that for you.
Yes, I'm sorry, that's not within the scope of the annual report audit, and so I'm unable to answer your question.
I had Tony and then I had Sarah.
Yes, thanks for the invitation to raise other particular concerns. The concern I'd like to just table and maybe get your feedback on is the ongoing failure of the Wellington bus service, given our project delivery, our engagement with Let's Get Wellington Moving is all dependent on the recovery of our bus service, and it's now been coming up 5 years. So I just would flag to you to maybe take that factor into, in some form into account when you're looking at our ability to deliver our program. Well, it's all about, because even climate change and everything, it's all about mode shift, and I think that's more of a quantitative, or that's a dependency. You might see it as a constraint. If it doesn't get fixed, it's a constraint in terms of us being able to deliver both our projects and our work program, but also on our wider Let's Get Wellington Moving program and the partnership that's involved with that. Thanks.
I wonder, Tony, if that, I feel like I'm a bit of a constrainer here because I want to reflect. My question was, are there other things we want to have done in relationship to what is represented in the annual report? So that's going to be either our description of our physical services delivered, actual, or our financial results? That's what Karen's asking here. That's an interesting question, but it may be more related to the long-term plan, because the assumptions that we build into the long-term plan around let's get Welly moving would be more relevant in that sense.
Well, so just to follow on, it's not really because for example, the Golden Mile project is to be executed during the next annual plan, and it's largely dependent on the recovery of the bus service as we move towards a mode shift. That project is heavily dependent on mode shift, and at this point, the capability of the city to support that mode shift is very constrained by the inability of the regional council to provide an adequate bus service. And so that was, I just wanted to, I'm not saying that I'm expecting you to review the bus service. I'm just really more saying when you're coming and look at the partnership, when you look at the project profile, if you could take that factor into account maybe in some of your commentary, or just ask the as an ongoing basis. We're talking about the plan that's going to be later in the year. That's a factor I think that would be suitable for your attention.
Thanks, Tony. I think I've got Stephen and then Paul have got comments to make.
The thing here is that we've got specific KPIs in our annual report or in our annual plan, which is a focus for the annual report and the audit that happens, so that these things that you're raising, Tony, are not within the jurisdiction of this council in terms of public transport. So I think the terms of reference for looking at these things is actually reasonably narrow, not broad in the sense that you're kind of describing, but there are other mechanisms for looking at that as opposed to a actual annual report audit, which is holding this council to account for the things that it promised to deliver at a certain cost. But Paul, perhaps you might wish to add something.
Yeah, I was going to say something very similar. Thank you, Stephen. But the process is that in the long-term plan you set your KPIs, and then in the course of the next 3 audits, those are actually picked up as part of the audit for the annual report. Council is going to have an opportunity as part of the long-term plan work that is now starting to actually have a look at what they want KPIs around going forward. What they, with caution, need to do is also look and submit on Greater Wellington Council's KPIs around buses and things like that, so they can advocate for that change that you're looking for. Some of this is not within the purview of us as a council. It is actually Greater Wellington's responsibility, and that influence is actually through the long-term plan process for their long-term plan by making a submission.
Thanks, Paul. Sarah, I think you had a question or comment you want to make.
Yeah, so just following on from the impairment issue, we had 970 slips last winter, and I just wonder if there's any ability to include in the plan a look at how well we're planning to recover or provide for expense in relation to slips.
That's not really part of the annual audit of the financial statements. I think Councillor.
Am I able to, Sarah? There's a paper coming to the Environment and Infrastructure Committee on that very topic next month.
That's great to know.
Thanks, Sean.
I think what you're seeing is councillors wanting to understand how we can carry out our assurance role for ourselves, but not quite sure of the mechanisms to do so.
Yeah.
Just bearing in mind the annual report's looking back at the performance and what Siobhan's identifying. Here's the go forward, looking at that's what's happened. These are the options available. So that will come, but not through this mechanism, Sarah.
It would come through more our risk identification and assurance work, Sarah. Yes, Karen?
Will there be any noting of that particular, of those events, 970 slips? Is it noted in the report?
I think Siobhan has. Oh, you mean in the actual annual report? That depends on your KPIs.
Okay.
Yeah, and you put your highlights and lowlights. Oh, can I say, and it'll cover both Councillor Randall and your question, Councillor Free, is when we audit the long-term plan, we will be challenging the council on capital doability. So you'll remember last time we had some questions about, you you are able to deliver X amount of capex over the last 3 years. This is what the history looks like. This is the number you're putting in your long-term plan. We will look at it by by significant asset class, roading, cycleways, footpaths, and that is the time when I think you can provide the challenge also, like, can you deliver on your plan?
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Karen. I sense we've probably spent the time we need to. You can see, Karen, that actually anything that you are able to add or cover in your audit, you can see that we will be willing ears as you look through from an annual report perspective. So I'd invite you to think about that as you do your work and recognise that there is a good venue here in which you can report your wider findings when you've done the audit. Look, just a couple of comments from me, please, as we move towards the motions. One is, Raina and Karen, I'm just conscious of page 28 and 29, where you have put as your first focus item 2 matters that we were qualified on for last year. And I would hope that between the two of you, we have a suitable pathway to consider that early in terms of trying to resolve those or trying to reach a position that we go forward on, rather than it being a late running matter, if I can be upfront about that. The second thing, Karen, is, look, I appreciate your caution around the dates that are in here. The dates make sense. You've been magnanimous enough to mention that they are somewhat in your favour, but they therefore mean that they are the outside of performance. And I'd be very keen, again, that as you work through your resourcing situation, that you keep the city fully informed of any risk to those. Otherwise, I'm going to take those as a red line in the sand. If that's okay.
Yes.
With the engagement letter, thank you. I think we've got to recommend that it's actually be signed. For the want of taking it further, members, I have read through it. It's a reasonably standard engagement letter, but it is important because it does reflect both the respective duties and responsibilities professionally on both the city and ourselves, and it stands out as a relatively straightforward set. So could we go to the recommendations, please? Because, in fact, I would like, and I'm sorry, Stephen, I haven't said this, but I'd just like to make one minor change to number 5. Firstly, we receive. Secondly, that the draft annual plan is noted, and the draft engagement letter is also noted. It actually would be normal for this committee to recommend that it is signed by the Mayor. And I think, unless, Stephen, I'm going to do that, I think it should actually be a recommendation from the committee that the Mayor sign the engagement letter, please. If we could, sorry if this actually was my second one. I got another one to go. We delegate authority to finalise the annual plan to the CFO and myself as the chair, which I appreciate. And actually, I would like to include my name as the chair in the 5th one as well. So it delegates the authority to the CFO, the Mayor and the chair to finalise. And I would just like to argue that from a principle perspective, I need to ensure, we as a committee need to ensure that in this case, the auditor has enough time, and dare I say it, fee, to be able to do their job. Because you've already expressed strong preferences here that we have a good audit, and it would be incumbent upon us as a committee to ultimately have some view on what that fee is. Okay, so Stephen, as long as I haven't breached any particular standard, mate, I would be very keen that the position of the chair of this committee be added as one of the delegatees in number 5. Folk happy? Tony?
So, I mean, in terms of, I think in principle I support you, and for the reasons why, I just wanted to comment from the officers about any particular issue that there may arise from, for example, the amendments proposed in item 5.
That's all entirely fine.
So then, if it's okay with you, I'm happy to move the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Yes, I was hoping we'd just take them all as one substantive motion, but if we should probably take that as an amendment, is this, oh, okay, this is the way we're going to do it? Okay, so you're prepared to move that as an amendment, Tony? Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Liz. I'll put so we're moving the amendment, which is number 6, right?
So not as an amendment, substantive?
No, we're moving it as an amendment first, so that it becomes part of the substantive motion.
So that's clarify the wording as well.
Yep, I'm comfortable with that wording, that the Mayor signs the engagement letter prepared by Audit New Zealand. Oh, you're going to put up? Oh, okay, as a Rebecca. Thank you, Tony. Oh, it's always, yeah, good on you. Well done. I should keep the standing orders.
Right, no, it's just no, we take our time and get it right, and we don't have to revisit it. We are the audit committee, so we should do things properly.
I agree. I think I've said that, haven't I? We must practice good governance. Yeah, I'm having to swallow my own words here.
Just to clarify, who was the seconder for this?
Liz was the seconder, please. Brilliant, thank you. So if we're comfortable with that, can I put the amendment, the view being that if it's accepted, we will treat that as part of the substantive motion. So can you please use your device to vote, please? No, that's for number 5, which, to be honest, we're not treating as a. Have I voted? No, I haven't.
Not yet.
It's coming up. Right, how are we going with the voting? Is that okay?
That's carried.
We have voted, so it's carried, so it becomes the substantive motion. So let's just go back and check that we're comfortable. Liz, we have slipped in the role of chair into number 5 without directly a motion. I need to put my hand up on that one. So it's sitting in there. But that now becomes a substantive motion. The key thing being that with the substantive motion, we're authorising or we're requesting that Tory signs the engagement letter with the auditor. So do I have a mover? Because I didn't actually get a mover and a seconder for the original motion. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Iona. Is there any discussion on the motion? There being none, I'll put it. Can you please again use your device to vote on it, please? It says I haven't voted. Is that right? Try again. Oh, there we go. Right, thank you. It's carried. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. G'day, Laurie. Welcome to the meeting. You're welcome. Can we please move to the item 2.3, which is the health and safety and security performance report. G'day, Mira. We've got TJ and... Welcome, you guys. I'll let you lead off in whichever way you choose to do that, please.
Thank you, Chair. Kia ora tātou. With regards to the report submitted, we have provided a bit more background information to add context to the work that's been happening. A few key highlights to outline before we open up for questions. The health and safety and security strategy that we've been working on since June last year is a 5-year internal strategy to guide Council on its path towards having a proactive safety culture. We held a number of workshops prior to Christmas across the organisation with a range of staff. This also combined with some external research that we had done of other organisations presented consistent focus areas for us and for the strategy, and they were mainly around our culture, systems and resources. The strategy at the moment is on track to be delivered for July 2023, so we're quite excited about that. There's some background information into the Protective Security Requirements Framework that Council adopted in 2021. Assessments have been undertaken recently to build a picture of what is required to achieve a managed state. We're expecting a first draft report next month, which is fantastic. And just lastly, the My Safety project, we are excited that our new safety and security management tool is tracking along really well. This system replaces our current system called Risk Manager and will provide greater usability at all levels, including elected members. My Safety Phase 1 launches in March with ongoing development and feature releases planned for the next 12 months. So it will start to evolve over the next 12 months once it's launched next month. Along with the report, you have also received our Q2 Health, Safety and Security Performance Dashboards, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that. I appreciate the report, the attention to both systems and our responsibilities, dare I say it, as elected members, and also the data. That's superb. Do I have questions for the team here? Yes, Anna.
Thanks, Wendy. Just a small question around the health and safety representatives trained. There was quite a big difference. Was there any reason for that?
It's not uncommon to see the training numbers drop towards the end of the year, so we don't run HSR training in December, so that's expected. So you'll start to see that pick up in the next quarter report you'll receive in the next committee.
Thank you, Anna. Any other questions? There are none. Look, thank you for that. It actually, I always feel bad when that's probably why I have long meetings. I always feel bad when you get a really good report, but it tells us everything, and treat it as having been considered seriously. Certainly it has been, I know, by a number of us, and I appreciate what you put in front of us, so thank you for that. I'd like to move to the recommendation, which is that we that we receive the information. Do I have a mover and a seconder, please? Thank you. It's great. And Liz, did I see your hand up? Ray, sorry. That's brilliant. I was about to call you Tony. I knew that was wrong. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Oh. Devices. Let's use devices. You can see I'm in the old age. And then I can't even get my vote recorded. Rightio. I'll go to correctional school one day for chairing meetings. Thank you. The motion's carried. Right. Kim, I suspect. Kim, I've been told that we should have a cup of tea at past. Believe it or not, that's 14 minutes away according to my watch. I'm not actually wanting to suggest that we need to be finished by that time because you have come with a very big paper. But if I could just reflect that we probably should have a very quick break at some appropriate stage in the middle. I don't want to rush you, but I'm also conscious there are one or two things that you're going to lead us into knowing that we will do in the future as well in relationship to this paper. Thank you.
Kia ora, Bruce. Kia ora tātou, he rangatirama. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kim Wright. I'm Principal Advisor Risk Management, and I'd like to introduce the paper today, which I'll take as read. There is a couple of things to note. I guess the first thing is that we do have a dashboard where we note emerging risks. One of the things that's become apparent in the last few weeks since the floods and the Cyclone Gabriel is the increase in conversation around managed retreat and viability of communities. We'd expect to have put that on the emerging risks area just because it's something that I think all councils will be following very closely as that conversation plays out at the national and regional level. So just to let you know that we'll be keeping an eye on that as a council because there could be precedent set or some pretty interesting decisions made around viability, insurance, those other matters that will be playing out in the public sphere. The other things to note on the paper that we're well advanced in preparations for a risk appetite workshop. This should dovetail quite nicely with the priorities work that you've been doing. The idea is that there's no opportunity without risk, and we're a council that has got a lot of work on the go, but obviously there's some things that we want to be more cautious about and some things that we really want to take more advantage of. And we do make decisions here as a council where you do accelerate some things and some things you'll take a bit slower. So having those risk appetite statements can help provide that framework for saying we're doing this because these are the things we care about. It's not mandatory, this appetite statements, but they're kind of a group position statement on these are the risks that we would like to take a bit more of, and these are the things that we would like to be a bit more cautious about. So we've never really had clear risk appetite statements for the council. It's a bit of a lack in our risk management maturity. So we're having a crack at developing these statements in a workshop on the 14th, and I'd really encourage you all to come along and to encourage your colleagues who aren't here today, who aren't on this committee, to be here to provide your views and your opinions, because it's going to be very much an interactive test of your views, because you're our decision makers. So what is your appetite for the risks that we take as a council? And more will be, I'll send out a bit of info before the workshop so you can get a bit of more detail on what will be involved. That's probably it in terms of just things that are outside the paper, so happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that. And look, my compliments to your work, particularly obviously with senior management, because I get a strong sense that senior management have taken ownership of this document. And to me, that's one of the first sort of, well, non-red flag, what's the opposite of a red flag? Good flag, whatever it should be, that actually this is being taken seriously, and we then have the chance to get a proper risk culture through the organisation. So well done, thank you. And thank you to your colleagues on the executive leadership team. Doesn't mean to say that we, by the way, members don't have questions and comments. That's exactly the whole point. But actually, I just want to acknowledge the work that's being done today. That's great. So questions, yes, Tony.
Yes, thank you. It's so first of all, you know, it's really I'm really pleased to see the focus on improving the maturity, and I think the next step to being working out a risk, acceptable risk level is the right step. I've got a question around a particular issue, which is the issue of the failing street lights. You know, where it's, you know, we have a fault in a number of our lights, that they've been falling down or hanging from wires, becoming unsafe, and it was reported that it seems that some parts of the council have known about this for a year or two. I'm not sure of the exact thing that was just reported. It seemed to me that this is a risk that should have been registered earlier, and then maybe it could have been dealt with earlier. And I just wanted you to comment about, you know, whether you've had a look into this and whether or not you know, the cause of that risk not being tabled have you know, has been identified, or you know, what happened in terms of that delay. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. I can answer that question. Siobhan's team has asked us to look into the management of the issue since it was first identified and what was escalated, what wasn't. That's a parallel review to one that's looking into the causes and underlying issues. So that's been added to our internal audit programme for this year. So we haven't yet drawn any conclusions. It's early days.
And I guess one other thing to note is in the paper you will have noticed we looked at our strategic risks and what are the threats we're doing risk profiles for as a council. One of the new ones that's proposed is inadequate policies and controls. So for things like the checks and balances around how things are escalated, for example, or whether people are using their risk registers, I would expect that to be something that we could include in there. We don't get right down into the weeds on the strategic risks, but we do look at systemic or systematic problems across the organisation, say are there gaps or opportunities here. So we'll be looking when we've developed that risk profile to say, are there things across the council that we think are so I guess significant that they could affect our ability to function as an organisation, deliver our long-term outcomes, or you know, really bring the council down. So that's where our strategic risks lie. But if there is a problem with widespread lack of controls, our assurance team can help us identify those, and we can note them in the strategic risk register that will be being developed.
Yeah. So thank you. I don't have any evidence that there's a systemic failure in this risk, but I think, especially on the health and safety side, the risk framework is only as strong as its weakest links, and so I'm pleased that you've got a focus to relook at that area. Thanks.
Thanks for all your work on this, really important. I just want to ask you, first of all, about the likelihood of earthquakes that you've got on page 95 of, sorry, these are our papers, the overall summary, saying that they're rare. I presume you mean these are major earthquakes, not the ones that we have regularly?
Yes, obviously we can get earthquakes at any time here, but for each of the likelihood and consequence ratings that we have on the profiles, they're basically maximum credible scenario. So for Wellington, there's that magnitude 7.5 plus and tsunami. So obviously a very major event, and GNS Science have done the modelling on the likelihood of that, and it's around 10% in the next 1,000 years. So our scale aligns pretty much to the long-term planning scale, so anything above 10 years kind of becomes rare, but it is still very rare in real terms to get that scale of event. But of course, because the consequences are so high, the risk is still high, so it's not something that we just ignore because it's rare. I should probably say I did note that you mentioned earthquake earlier and also climate change. We do have 2 risk profiles for both of those, and we will be reporting on those to this committee. So,
yeah, no, I'm aware of that. I guess I'm just wondering about those earthquakes, which are reasonably significant and do damage to significant damage to property, as happened in 13 and 16. Are we able to encapsulate that?
By default, the rules, regulations, the processes that we put in for larger earthquakes also apply to those small earthquakes. So I guess thinking about the risk management that we do as a council for those things such as land use planning around liquefiable soils or building codes, those are applied as per the law, but also the smaller events we're covered if we're covered for the big events, I suppose. We prepare for the worst and hope for the smaller events.
Okay. Next question, about climate change. Thought that was an interesting comment to make, that it was unlikely that there would be an adequate response. 40 years councils has been going at this. How did you sort of come to that? Because it is partly political cycles which determine response.
Well, this was done with my peers, the subject matter experts in the ELT. I guess we have got to Atakura first to zero. We've got clear strategies here. Climate change is a priority for this council. It's an LTP priority. We have got a lot of work going on across the organisation and also with the city. So that will have a complete change in tack in terms of not responding adequately. Of course, it reflects our influence as well. It's only as much as the council can do. We can influence others, but we're not responsible for all climate change action in the city. We can play a part with our work, but the likelihood of us reversing tack or changing on those big things at the moment is unlikely. Yeah.
Okay, and do you think that this framework is responsive enough when we get more information, like with Gabriel, that we can ratchet up our response in the risk rating?
We can always review the risk rating, and that is one of the risk profiles that we will be looking at. I mean, the idea is looking at future shocks and what is the possible worst case scenario we could look at for each of those profiles, as well as all the measures we've got in place. I think we will be looking at more of a climate-focused or weather-focused event for the scenario on that profile. We haven't had too many challenges with, say, flooding and coastal erosion over the last few years, so we can change that. I mean, responsiveness, we're talking future, so I suppose any piece of evidence that supports a real shift in the risk, we should be looking at the risks and saying, are these still fit for purpose?
Yeah, because it's ongoing, obviously, across a whole lot of phenomena, yeah. Now, the last question is just around asset management planning. So, look, you've clearly identified that there is quite a high degree of risk here, which is good in a way, because that means that we'll do more work on it. At what point do you think we will be confident enough to say, look, we've really identified those risks and we can give the city assurances that we won't have lights falling off or sewage pipes breaking, although someone else might be doing that for us?
Perhaps if I could just say some things and then refer it to Siobhan. We have actually got this topic of asset planning and our maturity on this agenda, and I wonder if that might be a better place to respond to that terms of what we've got in the pipeline for dealing with it.
In the pipeline, well done. I like your pun. Sorry, Sean, to go with you. Yes, I think our owner, Stephen's advice is quite well. We've got a later item, and if you haven't got your answer at that stage, I think that's the time to raise it. So we'll deal with it then. Look, with the climate change, etc. I mean, I think this is the whole point of, in some sense, we're trying to get ourselves past just what's on here, so we can have on a quarterly basis relevant discussions, and that will include new information that's coming in about this. I mean, to some extent, it's sad, but Cyclone Gabriel's actually said something which we thought might be rare. Actually, is now becoming more relevant, and actually our ability to respond, etc. So, every committee around the country is faced with this, faced with the challenge. What does this new information mean for our risk profile? And so that's what we want to do. And in fact, going back to the point you said at the start, this is also where developing a councillor sense of risk appetite becomes important as well, because it becomes an important communication tool that we're happy with a certain level or a certain setting or not, and that it should lead to action if we can't be satisfied it reaches that risk appetite. So that's going to be a very useful thing. Sarah, I'm conscious that I think you had your hand up.
That's okay. Well, I had something similar on my list about the floods and the slips, and I hope they are sort of encompassed in that other hazard event. But my other question was around, are we doing any monitoring of the risks to our growth agenda? Because a lot of our investment and debt that we're taking on is related to the city growing. How are we monitoring how successful we're being in that strategy? It's in a way that does tie into the risk around the public transport and the other health indicators of the city that Councillor Randall pointed to.
We don't have a particular risk profile for, I guess, some of those agenda outcomes. I'm not...
Perhaps I could jump in there, Sarah. I think as part of the preparation of the LTP, we've got our kind of our underlying assumptions that the committee or council will sign off, and that's the point in which we would look at those assumptions around growth and say, this is what it was at the last LTP, remember 3 years ago, where are we on that continuum? Is that still relevant based on some external advice in terms of what the numbers are showing in landing on a growth assumption for the next LTP. So I think it's more kind of practical at that level rather than kind of identifying it as a risk that we would then kind of assess, because it's actually a moving part that's really important to the planning for the long-term plan.
Thank you, and that's very reassuring. Can I ask if we're planning to look at the trajectory for just not our growth for housing, but also our growth for businesses? Will we be sort of going to look at those two categories?
Baz is nodding down the back there, so I'll take that as a yes.
I guess one of the ways it will be covered in a new risk profile that is proposed is the new strategic planning risk profile, which is really about, are we making decisions based on good evidence? Are we providing you with the right information for your decision making around uncertainty, costs, the assumptions and things we're putting in there, and do you have what you need to be able to weigh up the options that you're provided? So are we looking across the organisation? Are we looking across the city? So that's where that risk profile was hoping to land, but it's not really retrospective around did we achieve that growth.
Okay. That sounds awesome.
Thank you. Tony, do you have a final question?
Yes, I just, and again, I'm as new councillor, I'm still struggling to come across the breadth of information that's in this report. So there was just a couple of risks which I just wanted to understand, I guess, where they were, or if they were in there particularly. The first one was, I think you partly answered around the risk to the progress of our projects and our strategy related to the ongoing inadequacy of the bus service. So I'll put that aside. I think the other one was really a comment that's been raised in the annual plan, for example, and such like, is around the risk to the lack of contractor resource in terms of supporting the progression of our infrastructure projects, both under the ground and above the ground. And I'm not sure whether that's covered under the resource risk, because the resource risk looks like it's being refocused just on our own workforce, and I'm not sure whether you want to comment on how that's still being monitored.
The workforce one will cover contractors because they are also delivering our work. So the idea is around people, resource, and the ability to not just resource things, but also forecast the resource required, like in terms of people. So yes, that will be covered.
Excellent, thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Right, Ona, sorry, you had a final question.
Sorry, just one more. Siobhan is familiar with my concern around this. The earthquake-prone buildings that you've got on the earthquake risk, that is a very, very narrow focus on our role as regulator. We know probably that those buildings won't be strengthened by 2027, or there'll be sale. At what point are we going to include in this risk register the broader risks than just our role as regulator, Siobhan? So that means risk to reputation of the city, well-being of homeowners, all the rest of it.
Yep, and you referred previously to what our role is there. So as you're aware, we've had PwC come up with a model to try and evaluate what the extent of that risk is. So that will be coming, we'll be presenting a paper within the next few months to council on that, and also talking about what, if any, other roles we should be playing in that space.
It will be agreement of council what the roles are, well, as well as subject to legislation.
And with the cost, obviously, so we'll need to...
Yep, that's coming up. Okay, so, and then at that point, hopefully this can start to flow through to these, because I'm not satisfied with these profiles at the moment, just the way they are, so thank you.
And that's where ultimately, and I mean, we've got the value today, for instance, of the asset management plan report. I'm very keen that as a committee we have because we can't go across all these risks in depth every meeting. Otherwise, I'll be here a lot longer. But actually, we need to start breaking this down, basically, and looking at them with a level of some time and a chance to look at them in depth. In the way we will in asset management planning later on, which will be tremendous. So that's the next part of let's get our risk appetites done. It's really important. Then we can start dealing with a more in-depth look at these, which would be great.
Yeah,
yes,
could I perhaps just say something about kind of bringing the strategic risk register to life through each of the committee reports, and we do have a section in each of our reports that asks our authors to comment on those strategic risks, and it's really a reference back to these big strategic risks and how particular decisions or particular issues that might be being considered by a committee has given cognizance to the strategic risks that we've identified or this committee has identified. So it kind of draws that string through and makes it real as the decisions are actually playing out through each of the committees. And I guess this committee has the opportunity to kind of stand back and look at that and kind of ask the question, is that being effective in terms of how the committees are considering those risks in real time in a real situation rather than kind of this more of a strategic framework.
And the other thing so we've got the 14th, remind me the date? And
14th of March.
I'd want to encourage invite your fellow members along as well. That's actually really important to get us going. And then we're going to think about actually how do we review these on a regular basis. The other thing which I think is really important, reflecting back on some of the questions that we put to Karen, our auditor, is probably a discussion with you, Richard, about our assurance program. Because obviously a lot of the assurance we want is around these big risks. So we want to actually start looking at that as well. That gives us a chance to drive both what are our risks, what are we happy with, and also getting some assurance around the effectiveness of the controls over it. So it's easy said, isn't it, Kim? But that's where we're going to go. So that's tremendous. Can I move to the recommendation then, please, unless there are any other questions? Sorry, did you have your hand up, Ray? Sorry? No, I didn't. Rightio, can I move to the recommendations then, please, which we receive? We agree with the proposed changes. So again, my compliments to ELT for the work you've done with Kim on that. And it says that there, we agree to the approach for developing the risk appetite statements And we note the workshop that we're about to have with ELT, which will be tremendous. Do I have a mover and a seconder for those, please? Thank you, Ray. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, John. Hey, devices, please remember your devices. We're going to do this. So I get that in fast to show you I'm a learner. An old dog with new tricks. But then I don't know whether I've done it. Brilliant. Thank you, and I think the motion is carried. Can I suggest we take that break? You've done well, thank you. 10 minutes, so if we're back at, well, actually just be a bit longer, at 10 to 3, we'll just have a quick break. Thank you. Thank you for the discussion so far. good spirited discussion. I keep saying this morning, this afternoon. That's good. Appreciate that, and look forward to the rest of the session. So, if we can move into what is it, item 2.5, which is the insurance update. We're in your hands, and of course, welcome to our guests from Aon as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Good thing we're in the right place. Thank you. So, kia ora, Sarah Huston-Eastergaard. For those that don't know me, I'm Treasury, but also in charge of insurance for the council. I've got Joe and Cecilia joining me from Aon today, so our brokers that help us in this very complicated area of insurance. So, the paper we will largely take as read. It was intended as an information paper to provide you an update on the work that we did during the calendar year last year to place insurance and sort of all the activity that went on there, and as well as the insurance roadmap that we presented to this committee in September last year, and just a brief update on the sort of short period of time that has elapsed since that was adopted by this committee, or endorsed, I should say, by this committee. When we originally presented that paper, it was assumed that we would table it as read. We do have a little bit with the extra time we've been given thanks to the delay in proceedings. We can give you a bit of an update on the I guess the impacts of what's happening up north, etc., with the recent weather events and earthquake in Wellington and things like that. We don't have the full picture of that yet, but we can give you a little bit more flavour on how that is sort of currently playing out, but will potentially play out in the markets in terms of how that will help or hinder us in our endeavours to replace our insurance leading up to 31 May this year. So effectively the weather events are, I mean, I'll let my colleagues from Aon give you a bit more detail there, but they're, like I say, unprecedented, and we still don't know what that means. Luckily, the earthquake in Wellington was a non-damaging event, so there's sort of no impact from that particular one, but there's flow-on impacts, even though it's not directly impacting us from the weather events, in terms of how much we will be able to get, or how much our insurance will cost us. Just as a bit of a precursor to this, how this might play out, a number of those insurance markets in the northern part of the country have had to repurchase their reinsurance already 2 months into the year. So they've had to do that for the following 10 months of this year, and that will erode the capacity that's available for this calendar year in the market. We're slightly, we have a slight benefit in that we, as Wellington City Council, go to international markets as opposed to relying on the local market. Decisions made back in 2015 have helped us in that regard. However, there have been some very significant international events that will also impact on our ability to get insurance again this year. So Hurricane Ian, estimated to be around $55 billion worth of insurance cover there, or replacement costs for those assets, as well as the sort of Syria-Turkey earthquake that is obviously still playing out as well. Having said that, we will have a better understanding of how that will directly impact us in May when we come back and report to this committee. As we go through the process of placing our insurance in the market, and the availability as well as pricing on that insurance that we get offered. So anything you want to add?
So just rolling back to even before these recent events, what we saw was back in 1st of January, that's when a lot of major insurers negotiate their insurance treaties. And what we saw was that there was a dwindling of capacity. And these are all driven by a couple of things. One is obviously the global insured losses was standing at that time about $132 billion. And as Sarah has already said, the biggest one at that time was Hurricane Ian, that was between $50 and $65 billion. But what we were also seeing back in 2022 was that there was a lot of increased frequency and severity of not the primary events like the earthquake, the hurricanes, but mainly those secondary perils, such as storms and floods. So they were constantly eroding the reinsurance returns. As a result, the reinsurance had a fundamental shift in their pricing and their capacity and the risk appetite. So then, obviously, we had the two major events recently in New Zealand. So what we're expecting, the aftermath of that, is there will be a further pressure on capacity, absolutely. Underwriters will become more selective in where they deploy their capital, whether they go to New Zealand, which has got earthquakes, floods, cyclones, or do they go to somewhere that's a little bit more benign in terms of risk. And the other thing as well is we are also seeing them focusing a lot on underwriting information, and that is one thing that Council does very well in terms of providing information around construction, protection, exposures, and also the fact that you guys are on a constant de-risking portfolio journey in terms of perhaps demolishing some of your older buildings and obviously building new and more resilient buildings. So it is a good story, but it will be a challenge this year because of all these effects of the reinsurance and of the cyclones and the hurricanes and all these constant floodings at the moment.
And as the economy that says that means increased rates for probably less cover.
That's the other thing as well, because there is also a focus. So what has happened is that a lot of insureds, prior to 2020, a lot of insureds were just rolling their insurance values. And what had happened was there was a case where there was a grain farm in the US, and they had a $20 million loss, but they were only insuring for $1.2 million on the insurance schedule. So that is putting a lot of focus at the moment on making sure your values are adequate, and that's obviously is pushing your values up, which means your values and your premiums increase accordingly.
Thank you.
So just happy to take any questions on the paper or
Brilliant.
other,
Okay.
that if we can answer that.
Yeah. So look, can I just ask a sort of a framing question before I open it up? You're making the point to me, Sarah, that actually this is for our information, and quite frankly, the committee's been very interested in the roadmap and work plan report, and indeed what visibility we will have over particularly the recommendations. And I mean, some of the recommendations directly affect the work of this committee. So I might be more interested in looking at them rather than just receiving them. So I'm just wanting to understand what is the status of the report vis-a-vis this committee?
Thanks, Bruce. So I guess it ties into the conversations that you've just had with Kim. So we are very much a table at the risk appetite conversation that's going to occur on the 14th of March, and we will be looking to be interacting with you and receiving you and your wider councillors' view on what your risk appetite is, so that it can help us to determine where we go from here.
Okay. Brilliant. Well, I suspect we might have some questions from our members on that one, so we'll see. We'll just explore that a wee bit further as we go. So we're open to questions. Iona.
Thank you. I'll just start with three. Thank you so much for doing this work. It's incredibly important, and I hope all our colleagues will get to read it. First question, the sum insured is personally causing me problems. I wanted to pay my insurers more money, but they wouldn't let me because we know the building costs have gone up so much. So the comment was made that about getting adequate cover, but what happened, is it true that the market is actually not prepared to give you that cover?
I'll let Jo answer that one.
Yes, there is some insurers after those events have put embargoes, so they're not accepting any value increases. So it is true that in some ways it is a difficult situation where, one, they expect you to go get insurance valuation, so your values go up, your premiums go up. But at the same time, they turn around and say, sorry, we got no more capacity to offer because up until the 9 months of 30th September 2022, the reinsurance capacity actually declined by about 17%, which equates to about $115 billion. So, but they still expect you to do that. But what they're trying to do is make sure their values are correct, they're collecting enough premiums so that when there's a claim, they have enough premium to pay for those claims. So because of the claims inflation and all that. So that's the issue that we've currently got. Yes, you're forced to do the valuations, but you don't necessarily be able to get the cover that you want.
Okay, that's incredibly helpful. So next question, the big question is really what's the future of our insurance? If climate changes and someone once told me that the insurers are the best friends of the environmentalists because they always accepted climate change. Are we going to be able to insure for damage done by climate change?
The issue of climate change is definitely one that has been talked about, and of course in the last couple of weeks in particular, what's coming forward as we know that insurance it's really for the sudden and unforeseen, and climate change is no longer in that camp, right? So the first thing that we do talk about is around having data and information so you can understand what what are the risks and what are the issues, preparing better for those events and those situations. The second thing is really looking at your portfolio to understand what are some of the critical assets that you must and should insure, as opposed to it's nice to insure, but it's actually not the end of the world if these assets are damaged severely. So being really selective in terms of the items that you do choose to, and very deliberate about that. And I guess the third thing really is looking at some alternative means of transfer of risks. What might that be? So if insurance is no longer going to be affordable, feasible, capital's not there, what might we look at? And so there are certain options available, and I think the paper does cover a number of these options. There's a short discussion on, I think, captives, and there's a short discussion on parametric solutions. They are a little bit new to New Zealand, parametrics and captives, so very much some councils are looking at those as options, not just councils, but also other public bodies are looking at some parametrics as solutions where if you're having a higher excess or deductible, for example, you have a cover to, I guess, to protect the council in this case against any event for the cover. So if you have a very high deductible, 50 million or so, then you could buy parametrics to cover that event. So it works in a slightly different way than insurance. But there are options, which I know that Sarah is looking at the moment, and we are looking at some other propositions going into the future.
Yep, and just the last question for now, saying something about how we put 1.5 million into our self-insurance fund, which sounds really, really skinny. Like, what kind of amount do we really need to be looking at?
Yeah, thanks for that question. We've done some analysis on that. We felt that bringing it to this council at this time, given all the other constraints that we've got going on, was probably not the most efficient use of our time. The 1.5 million has largely sufficed to manage our self-insurance program. So anything that's below our excess is a small claim, effectively, all flows through that reserve. So that kind of carries on to support that. But it's fair to say that is not growing. So it will not be helpful in a significant event to come in to reach those sort of excuse me, that sort of first layer of insurance that we would need to chip in ourselves. We've done some analysis, we've got some numbers, and we'll bring that back. But again, that's all going to be determined and helped along by the risk appetite conversation that we have in a couple of weeks. It's very much on the table for that, along with sort of looking at parametric solutions and or captives. It's easy to, they're quite capital intensive when you start looking into sort of particularly the captives, etc. So it's not something that we think will be done in the short term. That's going to be over the near term, over the next couple of years, that we'll be looking to develop up those solutions. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I've got a lineup of questions. The question is Ben, Tony, and then Ray.
Thanks, Bruce. Try and keep out the weeds. I was in this sector for a decade, so it's hard. Now, in terms of the CCO assets, given we have signed off on an increase for them this morning because we know they're facing the same types of pressures, I noticed in the report there's reference to we could investigate it. Is it potentially something we can bring into the table to look at sooner? I know you can't apply like a material damage rate on a cable car, but...
Yeah. So we have begun conversations with the cable car. We actually spoke to Caesar, the previous CFO, a while ago about it and just said we're kind of open to have these conversations with you. We are now working with her name, Tansy. We had some conversations with her earlier last week about this, so it's clear that the capacity for them to be able to afford all of their insurance is restricted. There are trade-offs with bringing those assets onto our portfolio, though. We've got a certain amount of capacity for our own assets, and adding that into the mix does add another layer of prioritisation effectively in there. So we are providing them with the benefits and the risks. I think there's some nuances with that one in particular in terms of the types of assets and how they work with our portfolio. We've got roads, we've got tunnels and things, but we don't really have any trains or cable cars. So there might be some sort of in-between with them. We do cover some of the assets for other CCOs. Some of them are a bit of a mixed bag. So yes, we are having those conversations and looking to try and help them where we can.
Cool. There's one more. Because I noticed we seem to have a 2-year phasing for valuation between above ground and below ground. Yep. Do we have any underinsurance clauses that apply given inflating claims costs to those, or as long as it's we've done a valuation, we are not penalised if the cost of repair or rebuild is substantively higher than that valuation?
I'll let Joe take that one.
Right, and like I said, there is a lot of focus on insurance valuations. So I had recently met with a London underwriter who's here to see a few of the risks. Bad timing, you got the earthquake, you got the storm, you got the cyclone. But in saying that, he did say that the issue with insurance valuations, or from their perspective anyway, is that they just have to make sure you do have proper valuations. If you do it every year and apply some form of inflationary adjustments every single year, and as long as they're satisfied that you've gone through a very robust process, then they won't apply any average clauses or any other clauses that could penalise you in the event of a claim.
Thanks, Ben. Tony.
Yes. So one of the things that we're getting is the message around lack of resource, and of course the terrible thing that's happened up due to the cyclone has not made that any better. Can you just comment about the increased price and the lack of infrastructure resource in New Zealand? Does that affect the cost of insurance, and whether that whether the fact that if something bad happens, rebuilding buildings in New Zealand has become significantly more expensive?
I think hence it's go back to the topic of making sure your valuations are correct and you're applying the right inflationary provision every single year, but also look as well as it's not as perhaps pertinent for Wellington City Council, but it could be for, say, a manufacturing plant where because of the duration of the rebuild, their business interruption indemnity might have to be re-looked at, say, from 12 months to anything like 36 months, for example, because it's taking longer to rebuild your physical asset and to get your business running again.
Thank you. And Ray.
Thanks very much. Can you tell me what's the breadth of our insurance cover like? Do we cover every single thing that the council owns, or do we find some of the things that are less liable to be subject to not requiring coverage? For example, the police don't insure their cars, so they're all self-insured. So if we look at our car fleet, what's our accident rate and what's the cost of covering those? Is it worth us considering self-insuring those? I guess the main issue I'm concerned about is the infrastructure. So, like, if you look at the underground infrastructure, if you look at the pipes, then what's our coverage in those areas? Is it more important to put the greater emphasis on those things than things like cars?
Thank you for the question. So we have 3 different policies, three different major policies, and they are all looked at in independent of each other. The infrastructure policy covers the pipes. It's a comprehensive policy based on a probable maximal loss model. We work under the assumption that there is some level of funding coming from central government, and it's all sort of factored into the level of insurance we take out from there. In terms of your other question around the self-insurance, the vehicles, for example, part of one of the work streams within the roadmap is very much to look at the criticality and the importance of all of our assets across, the depth and breadth of what council does, and you can imagine that's quite a large piece of work. A lot of analysis has been done by Cecilia and her team in terms of current state, and then going forward we will definitely be taking those things into consideration, which assets are absolutely essential to be standing up post an event, which services we need to supply, etc., to really develop up that plan, which assets we're willing to let go of, and things like that. So while we don't currently have that level of granularity in our policy, that's sort of where we see our next gains in terms of consolidating our policy. I will just comment that your question around the vehicles, etc., most of that will come out of our self-insurance reserve, so the 1.5 million that we put aside each year. The majority of those claims, in fact I haven't seen a vehicle claim that's gone through above that, will go through that sort of self-insurance fund, so they don't affect the layers further up from that.
One last on that then. I see in this article that some of the CCOs have their own insurance, whereas some of them are covered in our blanket insurance. Is there a regular assessment on whether it's better value to actually have them in with us, in with our policies, or insuring on their own?
Yeah, that again, that's a piece of work that we'll do. We've done it on an ad hoc basis since I've been sort of in this role. We've had conversations with the stadium. They're a slightly different organisation in how they manage with the dual council. I won't call ownership, but investment into that vehicle. The zoo has historically been on our policy, whereas the cable car obviously sits outside. So it is something that we're considering as we go through. It's probably fair to say we're working on a bit of a squeaky wheel type process at the moment, where if they come to us and say help, that we're desperate for this, then we'll have those conversations in more depth.
Thank you for the raid. Right, do you have any further questions for Sarah? Yes, Iona. Yes, I think you're last.
Sarah, can I just ask why this isn't seen as being a key risk area? No, I'm just looking at the list again.
Which part of it, sorry?
The insurance overall.
I see it as a key risk area, if that helps.
It's got, we've got inadequate financial practice and fraud and things like that, but yeah, I'd see this as major. So are we going to be able to add that to our risk matrix?
It is on our risk matrix. I'm looking for Kim desperately right now, but
He's down the back there, Sarah.
Like I say, it's very much being included in that conversation as we go forward, right? And like I said, we're coming to the council on the 14th with.
So would it be under inadequate financial practice, just the one that we looked at before, or will you just change the wording? Anyway, just as long as it is included. Oh, hi.
Yeah, just.
Oh, never used this one before. It is currently covered under there, but also insurance is considered as one of the treatments or mitigations or risk management measures across many of the risk profiles, particularly for those big external shocks. So it's covered in more than one way, I suppose. So that's really, are the treatments adequate? So that's where we say, have we got the insurance we need, or that is recommended? So it's really about what is the damage we could incur and what are the treatments we could do. So do we try and prevent, or do we try and transfer that loss through insurance?
I take that point. I just wonder if it could be mentioned a bit more explicitly. The other question I had was for our residents. So you're probably aware that we've got a whole lot of earthquake-prone building notices coming up in the next couple of years, and people are facing massive costs. And then we've got climate change coming on as well. Is this just basically for ordinary people going to mean that insurance is not, or is not going to be possible, or that the law will need to be changed so that people living in apartments can actually self-insure rather than having to go to insurers?
I'm just trying to understand where the question's going, Ona. That's a private.
No,
matter.
except it's no, Bruce. It's very much a city issue because first of all, we care about people, but if people can't afford to live in this housing, which we have stipulated is going to be a form, then it does present problems for the city.
I think, with respect, that's probably something that will come back in the paper that Siobhan was mentioning, as opposed to a risk that this council was kind of managing through its insurance policies.
Final, I thought Ona was last, but last question, Ben.
Just thinking ahead of the long-term plan, so we've identified climate change resilience as our #1 shared priority. I'm wondering if there's ability for you to feed in around what projects or initiatives help tell that story. You're talking about how we're de-risking, whether that could be part of the LTP process. So it just helps us give a steer on what we should be doing or what we should be prioritising in terms of capital saved as well.
Right, thank you for that, Ben. Can we look at the motions, please, which is that we receive the information, we note, sorry? Okay, right.
There is an amendment that...
Okay, are we going to do this formally? Can you move your amendment then, please, Ona?
Sorry.
Okay, do I have a mover and a seconder for the paper? Thank you, Emily. Yes, get the process right. Thank you, Ray. Do I have a seconder? Do I have a seconder for the motion? Thank you, John. Right, so I now have a mover and a seconder, but I now have a motion for an amendment.
Apologies, sorry, I should have, because I just sent it through to Stephen. I didn't send it through to the committee advisors.
So it'll be a new 4, and it will read what?
Yeah, basically, so just I'll send it through to everyone. Just note that the officers will engage further and bring a paper back to the committee on a plan for implementing Aon's recommendations, and then of course it can be referred on to the relevant other council or other committees. So I'll just forward that. Sorry, very sorry that I didn't think to do that. It means 3. Yeah. And I'm sorry, I have actually written that for you, so that will be quick.
And just for the completeness of the process, I'm going to second this motion.
Thank you.
This amendment.
And really the reason I've just put that in there is that it's such a big issue that I think council needs to make a decision about where our appetite is and what our approach should be. That's all it is. It's a process thing. Yeah. The officers are supportive.
Yes, I think I would hope in affirming the motion you've got a sense from Sarah, her need for strong guidance from us in terms of actually what the risk appetite is, yes.
Yep, that's great.
Brilliant.
I've read it and I'm
Thank you.
happy with it. Thank you.
That's okay, Emily. Right. I think we have here the altered wording, which Iona is putting as a amendment and Tony is seconding. Is there any discussion on the amendment? There being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye with their green device. Oh, straight. Can we go back to voice, please? Seriously. This just about drives me nuts. Okay, thank you. The motion, the amendment is carried. Now becomes part of substantive motion, for which I have Ray as the mover and, remind me, thank you, John as the seconder. Is there any discussion or debate on the motion? There being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye with their device. Thank you. There we go. That's brilliant. Oh, you set this out as a trap for me, don't you, Stephen? You're smiling away every moment I slip up. I don't know, jelly bean or something every time I get it wrong. Rightio, the motion is carried. Thank you very much. Thank you for that, Sarah and team, for the report. I appreciate that and taking us through that. you can see it's an area that does interest the committee at length. Can I move to item 2.6, which is the long-term plan? Got a few coming up for this. That's great. Welcome to the table.
Kia ora.
Different size seats, well done. Right, in your hands, guys.
Kia ora, councillors. So I'm Jeffrey Coe. I'm the Principal Advisor in the Corporate Planning team here at Council, for those who haven't met me. And I have a responsibility, alongside Lloyd, the team leader in Corporate Planning, around coordinating the overall long-term plan program. Just thought I'd take a minute just to talk about a bit of context to the paper that you have. Largely probably take it as read, but just a bit of context. So the paper's here for you today. Most of the content of the long-term plan is canvassed through the long-term plan, annual plan finance committee, but today we're talking about the overall program, how we're approaching the program given it's a core planning exercise for the council, and the assurances and controls that we have in place around the program to ensure that it delivers quality product for the council. So I just want to talk quickly about the approach to the 24 LTP in terms of how we're approaching it and how that's informed the design of the program that you see in front of you in terms of the plan there. So the design of our 24 LTP program really began at the close of the 2021 long-term plan. We've offered lessons learned exercise in terms of what went well and what didn't work well, and some of you will have experienced 2021 and have your own thoughts on what went well and what didn't go well in terms of the long-term plan process. But the lessons learned, I think, sort of focus around the fact that the long-term plan as a process is trying to do two quite distinct things through the process. On the one hand, it is the strategic planning exercise for the council around what are our council services and infrastructure, are they fit for purpose for the future, and how might they need to change over 10, 30 years. And at the same time, by necessity, the program is also the annual planning exercise for the first year of the LTP. It does the budgets and the project programs, prioritisations, and so those are two quite distinct, different exercises. And so, reflecting on the 2021 experience, we saw a lot of decisions get collapsed right towards the end of the long-term plan process, and both different types of decisions being collapsed together, and that led to, by default, a bit of a focus on some of those shorter-term issues or concerns about the budget construction and about projects and programs. And so the design of this LTP program is we've really tried to create some delineation between the strategic exercise and the shorter-term budgeting and prioritisation exercise. And so that's what you'll see in terms of the schedule and the work that we've got laid out over the coming 18 months. Where you'll see space at the beginning to talk about our financial and our infrastructure strategy, about our community outcomes and priorities, and reviewing council services. And that's really trying to have that space earlier on around what are the strategic and policy settings for our long-term plan that will inform the later detail around budget construction and prioritisation. And in the back half, having that space to talk about the year one rates rise, which will be part of the LTP process, and also the projects and programs prioritisation. I think the other key area of improvement which will enable that we're looking to do through this LTP is a better base level of planning across council's activities in terms of our activity planning. We want to avoid a place where the options and issues that are coming for decision making are driven off of particular issues or projects that are on the table at the time, and a more methodical and comprehensive view around what are council services, where are they positioned, and what are those service levels, and how might they need to change in the future. So the approach that we're taking sort of, I guess, internally would be a more methodical approach around council services, assessing them and bringing the right information from that bottom-up exercises to councillors, and having options for councillors to review upon. And so you'll see the paper, it probably speaks for itself. We've got a structured program of work in place around the LTP. We've got broken into 7 work streams with leadership from across council in terms of our planning, our infrastructure, our finance and our strategy groups. It's a collective effort. We have a steering group of the members of the executive leadership team, chaired by Stephen, meeting fortnightly to manage the program, and we have workstream plans around the risks and issues, the deliverables, and managing those dependencies and risks in a structured way. I think I'll probably stop there in terms of what we've got in place, but happy to take any questions about the program.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate that. That's very helpful. folk. Do we have questions? Yes, Sarah.
Sorry, small thing. Have I missed it? But Sarah Hayes' name keeps getting mentioned. Are we able to?
Yes, we can change that.
Yeah, updated. Okay, great.
Delete it.
I was just like,
Poor old Sarah, yeah.
And sorry, Councillor Free, I am going to do this every time. I thought the reference to climate change was a bit light in the introduction, so I just hope that that will be taken extremely seriously throughout the process.
You don't need to.
My more substantial point, though, is around the trade-offs language, which I think you know I really don't like. And the reason I don't like it is that we have now we're reaping what we have sown in terms of taking the economic benefits while putting the environment second. I'm just wondering if there is a way of thinking about making decisions that is a bit more inclusive and involves more winning and winning. Of course, you've got to prioritise, get that, but the trade-off argument I think is quite dangerous.
I wonder if I can just chip in there quickly. One of the focus for us, and I'll just make the point that this long-term plan started the day after the last one finished. We explicitly said it was a 3-year program because of all of the substantial moving parts. It touches on all of the council operations, but then the core strategic document of the council itself. The bottom-up approach that Jeffrey just talked about, which includes our assets and all the rest of it, one of the focuses there, and indeed a focus in the Act, is around options. And one of the things that we'll be bringing to you from time to time as part of, for you to consider in your decision making, is a range of options, because after all, when we come to take the plan to the community, we do need to give fully costed options to the community. And then it's a decision making exercise to decide how those options are going to be treated in the final decision made from council. So we haven't used that language this time.
Yes, I was just going to reinforce that and say, we are actually talking the same thing. It's about prioritisation in, where the emphasis gets put, and that kind of aligns actually to the strategic priorities that the council will eventually adopt. So I would just simply say this, that our experience over various long-term plans and even the annual plan is that you can't do everything, and whether it be because of doability, affordability, there needs to be some sort of prioritisation. So that's really what that is about.
Thank you, Stephen. Tony.
Yes. So first of all, congratulations. I thought that was a very comprehensive plan, and it covers lots of views. It gives me lots of confidence, so thank you for that. In terms of the key dependencies or risks, if you like, I can see the ones you point are very relevant, but I was just wondering whether there's a couple of others that might be added into the thing. I'm thinking particularly of the election that's coming up and the potential for a change of government in the middle of this process. I know that there's a little bit of uncertainty around the Three Waters reform, irrespective of whether the government changes or not. But I think perhaps this national change is, just to keep an eye on it and to see where we will be at it in terms of the phase of where we're at the long-term plan, and if the government changes, where that risk will be and how it might be dealt with if someone comes in and totally changes the rules. And there's also local government reform, of course, which is sort of a bit of an ongoing thing. But again, it just seems to be that I know we're sort of trying to build a scaffolding on a moving deck of a ship at the moment. And I appreciate the effort you've gone into, but I just ask you to comment on that.
Yeah, certainly. Change of government, I think the reflection there around the key risks we have there around Three Waters reform, Let's Get Wellington moving, those are the potential areas where you could see most uncertainty from a change of government that could have the most direct impact on an LTP program. The timing of a general election is not particularly helpful for where we would be in an LTP process and the ability to respond to that, but we've identified those as risks, and we're having active conversations within the program about how we manage that uncertainty. Local government reform, it's sort of a watching brief at the moment. The assumption is that none of the there wouldn't be enough direction or decisions out of that reform program to directly impact the 2024 LTP, but it certainly could lead to changes which could create change for our long-term plan following 2024.
Thanks for that. Sarah.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to ask a little bit about the LTP and the Let's Get Welling Moving program, and how you envisage collecting the information you need to really put before the public the opportunities and challenges of the Let's Get Welling Moving program, so they can make useful feedback.
Yes, I think primarily decision making and consultation around the Let's Get Wellington Moving program will be done through the program board and as a partnership. That's where I think the key decision making and debate around partners in terms of what that program needs to look like would happen, rather than within council's internal LTP program. But certainly we need to reflect the Let's Get Wellington Moving program into our long-term plan, and so it will feature as part, in some form, and part of our long-term plan and the consultation we have around the long-term plan when we go out to the community in early calendar year 24.
Yeah, so that's not that far away.
No.
So I guess this is a major concern of mine right now, and I'm not very comforted by the answer. And it's like we have to do it, but how are we going to do it when we're working in partnership? I'd really like some clarity about this. Maybe not right now, but yeah, maybe I see
Thank you, Sarah.
Ms. McCarroll reaching for her microphone.
Through you,
Sorry,
Chair. This is a conversation Sarah and I have had. We had one this week. The process we're going through is ultimately to land on a detailed business case. That is a 2-year piece of work, which is ongoing. But in the interim, there will be certain items that come to the governing bodies of the 3 partners, in our case Wellington City Council, to make decisions in the interim. One will be about mode, LRT versus BRT. You'll have more information about the Golden Mile project. So along the way there will be key milestone points for decision making. The major special consultative procedure for Let's Get Wellington Moving in terms of the transformation of or our MRT program and urban development program will come at the point that the detailed business case is ready to come to councils for decision making. So that will probably mean that it's outside the cycle of this LTP, but it will ultimately involve a proper LTP process.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? Jeffrey, just my interest was, again, this committee's valid approach, and you've actually, if we were to move to our work program, we'd see the points that we will touch on this. But my interest as a risk committee is actually what will impede you in achieving the plan. In other words, the risks to the plan, not the plan itself. There's a lot of policy decisions which are nothing to do with this committee. So you've named the 3 big risks, and I guess at this stage they're all on a watching brief. The one that we haven't we've mentioned local Let's Get Welling Moving. We've mentioned 3 Waters reform. They're very, they're very challenging in their own right. What about the resourcing? Have we got the resources to do this? Because that's actually what's going to make this fly or not. We as an organisation can engage in long-term planning. We got that lined up? Do we have how do we monitor and manage that risk? It's really what I'm after.
Perhaps if I answer that, Jeffrey, it is a regular topic of conversation at our fortnightly meetings in terms of, are we on track with the various deliverables, have we got the resources in place, and where we don't have the resources or we're concerned about it, then we talk about how do we fill that gap. And probably I can see Andrea's nodding because having just recently been appointed as the CFO, she was performing an important piece of work in terms of rates review and other parts of the LTP. But Andrea's actively looking at, put it this way, replacing the resources that she was actually doing. So we're on it. And it's a regular topic of conversation.
I'd also make the point that there are 8 cross-council work streams involved in the LTP, and they're all at obviously different stages of development. all of those work streams have work stream plans, I think as indicated in the document itself. One of the things which is a standard part of those is to look at the risks sitting around it and the capacity and capability to deliver those plans, which will then drive the products themselves. Those sorts of things we actively monitor as a matter of the core project management sitting within the whole program of work itself. So it's an ongoing issue. The impact of resourcing, because the work streams are at different stages, is not going to hit everything at one time. And that's the point that we do know about, because in mapping the dependencies between those work streams, we got a bit of an idea of when that might have an impact and so on. So I think the one thing that you shouldn't assume that it's going to hit everything at the same time.
Yeah. I think what I'm really wanting to invite, Lloyd, is that if in doing this project, in terms of good project management, a risk was to become so extreme, I think it would be valuable for this committee and its risk role to be made aware of that. It's really what I'm trying to get to in the long run, because I appreciate you've got a good approach, you're demonstrating a good project plan in place, but any of those risks were to go awry, I think this is the place to bring that back to, so that we can make certain that there's appropriate discipline at a governance level in terms of. Right, got a final point, Tony?
Yes, apologies. There was one little point I just wanted to point, but like Iona's point about Sarah Hayes. No, just note that, it's very comprehensive and you've got all of the key stakeholders in there, but on page 11 of your plan report, you've got a list of the key stakeholder committees, but you're not having the Audit and Risk Committee on that list. I just wanted to see if you'd want to think about putting that there.
There may be
we just want to justify our position, don't we, Tony? Well done. I'll let you think about that idea. That's right, it'll be first. I do reflect when we come back, Tony, to the work program. You'll see there are some relevant points for this committee to be involved in the process as a whole. But as I said, Lloyd and Jeffrey, my concern is actually what's going to stop us from actually achieving the plan to plan. And I think if there's a significant risk there that might be increasing, it would be relevant from a governance perspective that it come back to this committee as and when needed.
Our hope is we wouldn't be bringing anything back to this committee.
Good man. Messages have all been given and received, which is superb. Can we move to the resolution then, please, which is that we receive the information and we note the risk management and assurance approach. Thank you, Tony. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Iona. Is there any debate on the motion? There being none. Thank you, Ray. You need to roll that in front of my eyes so I can remember to say, please vote the appropriate way. Thank you. The motion, I presume, is carried. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Thank you, Lloyd. Thank you, Jeffrey. Appreciate that. Can we move then, please, to the Project Management Maturity Report, please? Pardon? Is that a hint, is it, Tony? I'm feeling a bit, pricklish.
Good afternoon, councillors. So I have with me our principal advisor from the PMO, Richard Hoskin. Unfortunately, Andrew Cowie, who's the PMO manager, couldn't be with us today. We've got Richard subbing in for him. So this is a very quick overview. I won't dwell too much. We'll just hit on the key points here. So I came here in May last year to give an overview of what we're doing in the project management space. This is an update on that. Just for those councillors who weren't here last year, the PMO and the establishment of the PMO was one of the first things that Barbara did when she took on CE. So in regards to setting up the infrastructure and delivery group, she was very clear she wanted that to have a PMO, enterprise PMO management function, as well as an asset management function. So I'm here to talk to both of those today. So the risk that was identified in terms of the strategic risk, I think we're just bringing that up now. Marcella, are you? Cool, thank you. So it's defined as it's inadequate planning and prioritisation. So defined as inadequate planning, scoping and prioritisation resulting in an inability to plan for the resources, workforce and dependencies required to deliver our quantum of strategic projects and programmes and our business as usual work. So that was a very real risk, and in some cases it had actually produced issues previously. So the PMO was established to really be the key mitigant to this risk and really focus us on how we plan and prioritise our projects. So you'll probably be aware and familiar with the investment delivery framework, which we use at Council, which is really all about being very clear about the problem that we're trying to solve or the opportunity we're trying to take advantage of, and then going through a structured options analysis process to come up with a preferred option that culminates in a business case. So for those of you who've been at Council for a while, you probably would have observed that you were bringing you more business cases than we may have done previously, and that's really the point at which we can establish what the scope, what the budget and what the timeline of that project is, and it enables us to then track that. So we've been producing priority investment reports now for just over a year. They come to Council every quarter. I'm aware that the new Council haven't seen one yet. You'll be getting that in March, but that's a fairly comprehensive view of 19 of our most strategic or priority investment projects. We've probably got well over 80 projects running in Council at any one time. So this focuses on our key priority, so the ones which have very high visibility from a public perception, very high cost or complexity. Right, so if I look at the history, so as I say, it was established just after March, took a while to actually get up and running. Part of that initial establishment, and I think, Richard, you've been here since almost day one, haven't you, Matt? So part of that establishment was that we'd had a P3 M3 assessment. So that's our asset management maturity assessment. So this is what this today is about. It's just showing you how we're improving in our maturity. That was a really comprehensive assessment, and it came up with a lot of recommendations. So 49 recommendations across 4 categories, which Richard's just going to summarise briefly in the next slide. But the most important soundbite or takeaway from this is that we scored 1 out of a total of 5. So that's a sign of our relative immaturity. Although noting that the average is only 1.5 in New Zealand and worldwide, we are aiming to get much better than 1.5. And that's part of this journey that we're on.
Welcome, Richard. You've got some...
Yeah.
Okay, so we're on the table there. So the thing to note here is that many of the recommendations are multi-part. So in many cases, we've done the major part of it, and we've still got some small aspects to tidy up. In particular, our new PIARCA system, which is our project management system. So we currently implementing a Microsoft project system to allow scheduling, but also project header data management, risk register control, all of that sort of thing, and the reporting as well. That will actually, once that formally goes live, and that's likely to be at the end of this month, that'll unlock a whole lot. So we'll see a cascade of things being signed off as complete. So that's the big thing to note there.
Do we want to go through that?
Yeah, that's a bit too wordy.
We'll skip over to this one. This is a key one.
Yeah. So once we have this tool up and running, the big thing we'll be able to do is get good cross-organisational project risk identification, which will allow us to target or identify trends and then target organisational-wide rectification or mitigation or treatments, which may even get down to identifying areas where consistent trends are being seen, and we can do things like set up, send staff on workshops and so on. We're doing some good work on governance approach. So we've put a lot of staff, 59 staff, I think, through a project governance masterclass that we arranged with Tregaskis Brown. So most of ELT have been through it, and then the next tier down, and we've also put some project managers through it, so they have an understanding. So we targeted tiers 2 and 3, and then put it open for other staff to go through. It's interesting, but we had some people beating a path to our door to get on that. We have pockets of people in the organisation just really interested in upskilling, so that it's really good to see. So in the project planning side, we've also set up a project management fundamentals course with Nonsuch, which is another local training provider, and 62 of our project managers have been through that since June last year. And we are regularly filling up their courses. So it's really great to see. And there's been a noticeable uplift in the skill level of project management staff across the organisation. Workforce planning, Paiaka has the ability to do resource planning, so identify the key resources. So I had some talk earlier about resource planning. This will really help us from a project resource planning point of view within the organisation. Project financial forecasting. Paiaka has the ability to do a level of forecasting, but still Tech One is our major financial tool. Due to the idiosyncrasies of how some things have been set up in Tech One, there's no direct link at the moment, and any direct link is for the future. Yeah. So, so this is the phase model we're looking at. It's basically basically states that we're focusing on project management first. Then we'll look at rolling those up into program management, so identifying where managing successful programs, that methodology might be applicable across the organisation, and then into portfolio management, so using the tool for high-level management, strategic prioritisation, that sort of thing. That gives us, once we've got those sort of things identified, it really gives us the ability to do strategic management at change at a high level that's transparent to everybody. So project profession and PMO treatments. We've actually got effectively a community of practice across the project profession and the organisation. So I think it's about 150 people. So that's project managers and associated staff and interested people. So we have a lot of people interested in how we do things and how we could do things better. So we keep them up to date with changes to our various systems, the introduction of the Paiaka tool, IDF changes and improvements, and we also keep it open as a channel for them to come back to us to suggest changes. We do get regular feedback from people, either clarifying various terminology, improving the clarity of documents, or actually adding things in. We've done something recently around capturing asset capitalisation info earlier in the project delivery process, so it's ready to capitalise at the completion. We found that was a gap in our process, and the general increase in the skill around and detail around the reporting process. So yeah.
Thank you. So, anything else you need to add, or
no?
Questions?
I'll happily just take questions.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. Tony.
Yes, so congratulations. I really commend you for this work. I think it's really important. I also know it's really hard work to get people to do more work to join a framework when the benefits come so much later, about that clearer vision across the organisation. And so I just say thank you for committing to it. I just want two questions really. One is a couple of comments. One is what is the rough percentage of the projects currently using Paiaka across the organisation? I mean, how far into it are we? And the second thing is in terms of benefits planning. I just wonder if you'd comment to say, we're doing these projects to deliver benefits to the city, sometimes to ourselves, but always directly or indirectly to the city. I was wondering if you just comment on your, which I'm sure is still very low, but your progress on the benefits side.
I'll do a second.
Okay. So regarding the uptake of Paiaka, we focused on the priority investments because they're the ones that we have the reporting interest in. And counterintuitively, we've also had people beating a path to our door wanting to be trained on this new system and get their projects in. So it's actually been a case of throttling people back so we can focus on the high priority stuff and then get some stuff in later. But I'm doing upload sessions with people a couple of times a week, and my colleague Rob Scott, who's the project manager of the implementation, it's basically his full-time job. So I think we're up to around 50 now. I guess we have a bit of an exercise to know where to stop. There becomes a point where we're putting in. There's no lack of respect here, but the rats and mice project, where the effort and the cost for managing the system, by the time it's in there, the project will be delivered. So we're working on a threshold for that. So I would say we're about halfway for the ones we really want in there.
And I can answer about the benefits planning. So fair to say, how to put a business case together is proving to be quite challenging in terms of upskilling. So that's one area that we're really, really focusing on. And part of that, putting a business case together, is actually doing that economic analysis bit where you can actually look at the benefits that you can quantify, but then also treat the ones that you can't quantify and assess your options with all of that information. So that's first stage, to get that really landed and get that clear. And then from there, we can actually, if you can be really clear about what the benefits are you're attaining, then you can start measuring. So you will see from some of the transport projects, if we're claiming pedestrian benefits and improved pedestrian numbers, then that will come through with the improvements in the pedestrian counters that we're putting across the city, so we can actually start reporting back on that. So everywhere, and benefits planning and benefits realisation, I think everywhere I've worked, that's been probably one of the most challenging things to do, especially with long-term investments, because actually you have to really put that benefit plan in place, do it meticulously, and actually then continue to report on it. And there is a tendency with projects, and especially with project management folk, that you just get your project done and then you move on to your next one. So it's really being clear about who the benefits owner is to make sure that they put in their processes to do that. But to be fair, we are a little way off.
Thank you for that. That's very interesting. Any other questions for Siobhan or Richard? There aren't. Appreciate that. I just would note the final page of your presentation, where I can see some of the most immediate impact benefits, if I want to overuse that word, Tony, of the coming year. I noticed particularly the design, improve and promulgate investment management structures ready for the new financial year. So clearly 1 out of 5, you're looking to make those incremental gains as you go. And again, this has been really useful, and thank you, Siobhan, for reflecting the longitudinal value of the committee. You did inform us where we're going. We're good to see this in action. Love to hear 150 people, including those interested involved. Be interested to see where you get to from your review in June at some appropriate stage in the future.
Yep.
So thank you for that. That's encouraging. Can we move to the recommendation, please, that we receive the information? Thank you, Tony. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Iona. Any discussion on the motion? I put it. All those in favour, please use their device.
Well done.
Yep, there was almost, you were a bit slow there, Ray. You should have had your hand up waving around in front of my face, mate. That's right, okay. Look, it feels like don't go away, because you need to take us through the next paper as well too, please. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about asset planning now, and unfortunately, again, you chose the one day where both my asset planning manager and my PMO manager are away on annual leave, so it's not deliberate. Can we bring the presentation up, Marcelo? You're probably working on that now. So this risk was introduced last year, and I think it was Councillor Condi that added this in to our strategic risk register. And it was really to highlight the risks associated with a lack of good asset management and asset planning across the organisation. And again, it's one of those areas that Barbara initiated when she took over as CE. And again, we've established that in my group as an enterprise-wide function. And it's a centre of excellence function, so it's very light in terms of the numbers of people. It's got a very clear, defined focus of what it's going to focus on. So really, if we think about what asset management is and why it's so important to us, we are an asset organisation. So we deliver projects, we deliver services, but we need assets to deliver that service. So after the last valuation of our water value assets, our asset base is now well over $13 billion. So when you think about that in comparison to other asset-rich organisations, Transpower I used to work for, I think their asset base was just under $5 billion. Kiwi Rail is about $3.6 billion. Meridian Energy is around $8 billion. So we are, you know, we should be doing this stuff well. Those other organisations do it very well. And newsflash, we're not doing it that well. So asset management is the coordinated activities of an organisation to realise value from our assets. So if we think about it in a council context, is we provide a number of services to deliver all of our community outcomes. And those services need assets. So a really simple example is libraries. We provide a library service and we need buildings, libraries to actually deliver that outcome and those assets go from very large assets such as building to very small assets such as shelving. So when we do our asset management planning, we tend to just focus on those most significant assets that are going to have the most impact in terms of cost and risk and service. So again, we got a asset management maturity assessment done back in 2021. ACOM recommended 13 focus areas for improvement. If we think about scoring ourselves and benchmarking ourselves, they used International Infrastructure Management Manual scoring index, which has 5 scores: aware, basic, core, intermediate and advanced. We scored basic in all but one of our asset management plans. So we had 13 asset management plans associated with the last long-term plan. Transport was actually rated as intermediate. And the reason why transport is a bit more advanced than the others is because it's Wakatahi is a regulatory function which looks at all of our asset management plans and actually determines our financial assistance funding rate from the quality of those asset management plans. So there's a bit more rigour there because we've got that oversight from an external third party. And my experience shows when you've got a third party looking at things, you tend to raise the quality and raise the bar. So what we've done here is we've developed a centre of excellence for asset management specific to council. We've got a new asset management policy. We are developing systematic repeatable asset management processes and data improvements. So this, I can't overemphasise the importance of good asset data from which to make decisions. Is really the plans that come out of assumptions are nowhere near as good as the plans that come out from evidence. So we've got a very extensive condition assessment data collection underway for all of our properties, which again will form the basis of our asset management plans for going through for the next LTP. So progress in this area, I'm not really going to dwell on this too much. There's a whole lot of things that the team's knocking off and addressing those shortcomings that were identified in ACOM's maturity assessment. We've done a very, someone put some, those things always annoy me. Especially when they're a surprise. So we're already seeing some reduction in risk from where we scored ourselves last year. So the actions that have been taken and the undertaking, and the team have got quite a hairy and audacious goal to have all those draft asset management plans done by June, July this year. So that's part of that long-term program plan that you would have seen, that actually we need to have those drafted. And it's not, one of the things that I guess I want to emphasise as well, there's a lot of emphasis on the reports, asset management reports, in terms of the asset management plans. What we're really focused in on is making sure that we've got really, really good plans that inform the budgets, that when they come to council, you can see, and sorry, Iona, the trade-offs you need to make between cost, risk and performance, because that's what's really important, right? So you need to be able to see what the impact of either deferring renewals is in terms of whether it's going to increase the asset risk. You might save money, it might increase the asset risk, and it might reduce the service, but being able to do this consciously and being able to determine what those actions lead to is really, really important. So yeah, just a real summary. Basically, we've got the condition assessment underway. We are facilitating levels of service workshops across all asset classes across council to make sure that we've got a consistent way to show how we make those trade-offs between cost, service and risk, and lifting the overall maturity for asset management across the organisation. So I'll take questions.
Thanks, Siobhan. Sarah.
Thank you, Siobhan. How are we going on our water? You know, we're Wellington Water obviously responsible for it, but we've asked them to do more asset condition assessment to get an asset management plan. How are we going on that, and what's the risk to us?
Yep, so you would have seen from the annual plan that we're providing them with what they asked for further asset data collection, and that was as a result of what they can physically do.
Deliver.
They've also been given some further funding from the transition to actually improve their asset management systems as well. So we are working with them on what that would potentially look like, because we are looking at the what if scenario of water reform being delayed and us having to actually include water assets, which is the biggest kind of uncertainty we've got at the moment, to see what that plan would be and what sort of form their asset management plan would take.
Are you comfortable with the way it's progressing?
Look, I guess I'd like to see more data being collected on the assets. As I said, it's really difficult to make really good decisions in the absence of knowing what the condition of your assets are.
They talked about lifting their capability in this area. Is there a chance to actually put more money in at some stage?
Look, I think they've got some quite capable people over there, and I think you heard from the two who came to talk about the very high criticality assessment work that was done. So they've got some really capable people there. I think in terms of that constraint which they talked about in terms of the physical resource, you need people, you need contracting resource to go out and inspect those assets. So they haven't signalled that they're able to get over that, but I mean, that's an ongoing conversation.
Thank you.
Iona.
If we gave you more resources, would you be able to get more data?
For our own asset management plans?
Yeah.
I think we're okay.
So obviously, this is not the first time the council has tried to do asset management planning every 3 years. So are you confident that the processes that you've put in place this time will really lift the bar?
So I'm confident the asset management plans that you're going to get through the long-term plan process will give you visibility and articulation of how those plans have been established, and it's probably you didn't get that last time. I can't say whether you got it before that.
And we would know about things like failing lights?
Not necessarily.
Okay, because that made us look a bit...
So I'll just talk to that because I know there were questions about that.
Yep.
So there's a couple of things to this. So our risk management process, internal risk management process in terms of what's recorded in our operational risk registers failed in this instance. So we initiated a review into our internal processes as soon as we found out about the failing lights. Now, were we looking at asset failure for light fittings? No. So what we were looking at is pole failure, because that's obviously well publicised and well known about pole failure. So the lights were something new and we hadn't anticipated that, but I think you're always going to have, the reality is you'll always have that, but you have to start somewhere with improving, but I don't think we'll ever get to perfect, but it's about how we learn from what we've got now and how we improve. So in terms of asset failure from light fittings from here on in, yes, we'll be acutely aware of it.
Sorry, just last question, the trade-offs. Not that keen again, because, we would have put more money into some of these things if we had known of the need. So will you give us quite clear advice about what... We did. Will there be clear enough information to make sure that we are making the best decisions we can about... if we don't give enough money, what the cost would be?
In terms of the risk?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there'll be information given to you about what the impact on the service levels be and what the impact on asset risk would be as well, whether it would be moving into a moderate risk, into a high risk. So we'll be able to give you that information.
Thank you. Now, Sarah, did you have a follow-up question or a view that has been answered?
Actually, I remember when we looked at transport plans, we had quite good detailed plans of how we're going to repair things and fix things. What are we expecting as a deliverable in this water space? From what will we get to look at as a result of all the condition assessments they're doing?
So, that really all depends on what decisions come. So we won't be receiving anything about water if water reforms go ahead as planned, as currently planned.
Well, presumably the work that's being done will be useful to inform that somehow. Why are we doing it if it's not of any, if we're not getting anything back to look at, to observe or whatever? What's the deliverable for the money we're spending on the condition assessments?
We're setting this up so that when they move into the new entity, the residents of Wellington benefit from much better and improved asset management. But it's not necessarily going to be coming to us if it's handed over to the entity in July 24.
Okay, I'm not entirely sure why we shouldn't see something.
Welcome to the challenge, Sarah, of transition and uncertainty around Three Waters reform. Tony.
Yes, I appreciate your challenge. I mean, I've heard it said that there are sort of three types of things you're trying to keep track of. There's known knowns, there's known unknowns, and then, of course, there's the unknown unknowns. And I guess the lighting sort of falls into that last category. Look, I appreciate you've got to focus on getting the core stuff done and embedding the whole framework as a matter of process, and so I support that. I just wanted to know whether or not the asset work will help with our valuation work, which is obviously connected to insurance, is connected to the support for the Three Waters, irrespective of what happens.
Yep.
And support more widely of just providing a better service. So any particular comments on that?
No, absolutely, it'll support all of that. I mean, again, it's information is at the heart of good decision making, and that's what. So asset management is all about better decision making across a raft of factors.
Just the other thing to add, Tony, is that all of that asset work will feed into our infrastructure strategy, which is kind of joined at the hip with our financial strategy. So, they all point to those two things. And obviously our asset planning is a key driver of our financial strategy as well.
Thank you for that. Any other questions for Siobhan? Being none, can I look at the motion, which is, again, it feels always a wee bit naff or unappreciative, but with our thanks, Siobhan, we want to receive this to have a mover and a seconder. Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Iona. Is there any discussion on the motion? I'll put it then, please. All those, please use your devices. John? Yeah. Thanks, Sean. It's just called a device. It's quite simple. Motion's carried. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. That's right. Oh, we won. Woohoo. Right, do you want to announce that? That's the most important. That's the most important news I've heard all afternoon. Is that right? We won. Pardon? I think we're going to let's just deal firstly with the cricket. We won the cricket, right? Woo! Oh well, that's. Can we record that? Our appreciation. I'll move that. Rightio. We do need to keep moving because people are wanting to keep the day going. So, can I get us into the action tracking, please, Stephen?
I was going to suggest that you take the two next items together.
Agreed. Keep going.
Take it as read.
Thank you. Any questions on the action tracking or indeed the program, the work program? You're going to move both. Liz, you're amazingly efficient, and John's seconding that. You need to do this, guys. I thought we were here about good governance and appropriate procedure here, guys. No, thank you for that. And it's useful, Stephen, again, to have that program in front of us, and I've referred to it a number of times already. Can I look at the item 3, which is the public excluded motion from the chair? I'll move that. Do I have a seconder for the reasons I've got in there? Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Tony. I'll put the motion.
Discussion.
Go for it.
Bruce.
Is there a discussion?
There actually, yeah.
Well, sorry, please. Sorry, I did pause because you asked me to do good governance, and I was waiting, but nobody said anything.
Oh, well, who's?
Iona. I'm waiting for you, Iona. Then it's Ray.
I would like to hear some discussion on the reason for this. So, can whoever's bring this up?
So you're raising why are the legal risks?
Yes.
And why is the strategic risk around the sensitive stuff. I'm going to say it's around digital and cyber. Are you saying why is that being kept in non-public?
Yes.
Because if we're before the courts on any matter, we certainly would not want that out in the public. And in terms of the risks, really for the same reasons, the mitigation, I guess, opportunities for dealing with the cyber risks, just not something that we'd want out there in the public. And in fact, be handing over all of our strategies to prevent hacking to the hackers to go, come on in. So that's the reason.
I would find the reasons that have been set out here under 6A, 6B and 72A, Ray, in page 233, pretty compelling around this risk. And I think I want to reflect that Kim has been quite careful that actually everything else, which is essentially dealt with in public, which is great, but because of and again, it comes back to not just the danger to, the risks to us as an organisation, but actually also the protection of information. It makes sense, in my view, that we would pass this motion.
Thanks, I accept that.
Iona, do you have a point?
Just a quick point. So you would feel that our systems are secure enough so that cyber criminals can't actually hack into our system to get what we're doing anyway?
I would think that's a question that we raise and debate if we are prepared to move this into public excluded, because that's the key question. Okay, so look, I have moved, I think, and I have a seconder for this motion, which is Tony. So I'm going to test that motion by voting with our device, please. Motion's carried. Thank you for that. Right, if we could then move to item 3.1, which is the legal and risk. Oh, sorry. We're good to go? Rightio. Kev, we'd like to stand. We'd say this carrick here. Thank you. Unahia, 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 ki te uru tapanui. Kia wā te, kia mama, ki rakau, te te ana, te wairua. I te ari taku, koe eru rongo. Whakari e ake ki ronga. Kia wā te, arei rā, kia wā te.
Thank you, Bruce. Great cheering.